Good morning, people. Welcome to my channel. My channel Jyoti Audible is all about beautiful, amazing novels of Hindi by the renowned authors of the Hindi. But today onwards, I'm going to add the English literature into my channel. And the author today I chose is Barbara Cartland. It's a very romantic, beautiful story, The Karma of Love. So, in order to also the reach of my channel to the maximum audiences or maximum listeners, I'm going to start the English literature also. English literature is also full of amazing authors or amazing stories. So why not? So let's just start. So this captivating romantic love story begins when one chilly night, Lady Orissa, the main character of our story. Orissa is also a state in the east of India. It's a very beautiful state. So Orissa was thrown out of her house by her drunken stepmother in a chilly January night of 1885. Now Orissa wonders where to go. So the story begins from here. So let's just start the story. I will skip the long descriptions in the story so that listeners who start losing interest will be with me.
You can get out and stay out. I'm sick to death of having you in the house looking down your nose at me and setting yourself up as if you were someone of importance. You are nobody. Do you hear me? Nobody. Let's see how you fare without money and without me to look after you. If you freeze to death, all the better. As she was speaking, the Countess of Lindale, a large, fat, blousy woman, thrust forward the girl she was holding by the arm so that she fell through the doorway onto the step outside. The door behind her was slammed. Lady Orissa Fane remained for a moment lying on the doorstep, conscious that her head was spinning from a blow her stepmother had given her on her head, and that her arm was painful for the grip of fat yet strong fingers. The row had started over nothing. The Countess had always disliked her stepdaughter and regularly accused Orissa of looking down on her. Of humble origin and the widow of some petty official in the Indian civil service, she had managed with consummate cleverness to capture the Earl when he was returning to England, bereaved and desperately lonely after the death of his wife. To Orissa, England seemed a cold, dark, and miserable place in which she shivered and ached for the sunshine, which in retrospect seemed part of her mother's love. At night, in her cold little bedroom, she would pretend she could hear the comforting noises of India, the chatter of sing song voices, a baby crying, dogs barking, the creak of the water wheel. Mama, Mama, she would cry into her pillow. It was her stepmother who encouraged her father to drink away his troubles, having found in her previous married life it was the panacea for all ills. It was Orissa who suffered most. Not only was she in fact an unpaid servant in the tall, ugly house in which they lived in Bulgaria, but she also had to endure the shame of seeing her father incapably drunk night after night and her stepmother behaving like a virago. Orissa found herself cut off from companions of her own age and even from contact with ordinary people. It was at that moment that unexpectedly she saw a hackney carriage stop two doors further up the road and a man alight from it. The cab had actually to pass Orissa and impulsively she put up her hand. Cabby! The cabman drew his horse to a standstill. When he looked on from his box seated Orissa, there was an expression in his face which she knew was only to be expected. Ladies didn't walk about the streets at 11 o'clock at night, unaccompanied and in evening dress? Where do you want to go? The cabby asked grudgingly, and Orissa knew he was in two minds whether or not to take her as a fare. I should be very grateful if you would be kind enough to convey me to 24 Queen Anne Street. It's behind the Wellington Barracks. Her quiet, cultured voice seems to reassure the cabman that she was not the type of woman he had first supposed. And before he could get down from his box, Orisa pulled the cab door open and climbed in. Her brother had arrived home from India but a week earlier, and she had only seen him once. He had, in fact, been so busy that she had not had time to tell him how desperate things had become in the house at Eaton Place, or how intolerable was her existence. It seems to her that the cabman took a long time to reach Queen Anne Street, and when they at last arrived there, she remembered thankfully that she had a little money with her. She gave the cabman what he required and a tip, for which he touched his hat. Then she ran up the steps of the house in front of her. The door was open, and she found in a small hall there was a soldier in uniform seated at what happened to be a kind of reception desk. He looked at her in surprise, and she realized that he thought it strange that anyone should come in out of a cold night in January without a wrap of any sort. I want to see Viscount Ellingham, Orissa said. Second floor, ma'am. Name is on the door. The soldier answered with a military briskness. Thank you, Orissa said and started up the stairs. They were steep, and as Orissa turned onto the first landing, a man came out of one of the rooms and she almost bumped into him. He was tall and was wearing a blue mess jacket with a red braided waistcoat. He not only appeared surprised at her presence, but stared at her in a manner which in other circumstances she would have thought offensive. In some embarrassment, she quickly turned her head away and hurried up the next flight of stairs, but not before she had realized that the man's grey eyes in a thin, sunburnt face were uncomfortably penetrating. She had the feeling without looking back that he was standing watching her until she was out of sight. This forced her to hurry so that she was breathless by the time she reached the second floor and saw a card pinned on one of the doors on the landing. Captain Viscount Dillingham. She knocked because she felt that the man who had watched her up the stairs was perhaps listening. She made it a very tentative sound. There was no answer, and after a moment she knocked again, and then realizing there was a handle on the door, she turned it. The door opened. She found herself in a small narrow passage with two doors at the other end of it. Charles! It was hardly a call because by now she was shaking. Who is it? Her brother's voice replied. A door was opened and she saw Charles wearing only a shirt and trousers. Good God, Orissa! He exclaimed. What are you doing here? I had to come, Charles. She turned me out and I can't get back into the house tonight. There was no need for her to explain who she was. Damn it, Charles ejaculated. This is too much. Why do you put up with it? What else can I do? He saw she was shivering. Come, sit by the fire, he suggested. You ought not to have come here. I have nowhere else to go, Orissa answered simply. She crossed the bedroom as she spoke and sat down on the hearth rug in front of the fire, holding out her cold hands to the warm flames. Do you mean she really threw you out of the house? Charles asked almost incredulously as he followed her across the room. With some violence, Orissa replied. If my hair was not so thick, I should have bruises on my head. As she spoke, there was a little smile on her lips. It was such a relief to be here with her brother that now everything which had happened seemed almost amusing rather than tragic. Oh God! Charles exclaimed. Why did the old man ever get himself mixed up with a woman like that? I have been asking myself the same question for 8 years when I think how lovely and gentle Mama was. She stopped in the middle of the sentence. After all this time, it was still difficult to speak of her mother without feeling near to tears. I know, Charles said sympathetically, sitting down in an armchair beside the fire. But you can't go on like this. Next time it happens, you may not be here. Orissa replied. You ought not to be here now. I hope no one saw you arrive. Orissa hesitated. She didn't wish to tell him the truth because it might upset him. At the same time, she never lied to her brother. As a matter of fact, there was someone on the first floor, a tall man with grey eyes. Hell! Orissa looked at him and he said, It could not be worse. That must be Meredith. I'm sorry. Does it matter very much? It will not help things. Charles answered. Why not? Who is he?